Paula Dreeszen, a volunteer steward here at Arcadia Dunes, the CS Mott Nature Preserve. Here's Arcadia Dunes on the map. Today we're at Pete's Woods. This dark green little parcel here, it's about 135 acres. Pete's Woods has a 1.5 mile trail that's a loop, and it's really popular for spring wildflowers. We're going to be looking for the earliest spring wildflowers today, and before I lead a hike I always talk about a couple safety things. One, it's a warm sunny day. There's a lot of pollinators out pollinating the wildflowers, including bees, so if you're allergic to bees you might want to bring your EpiPen. The other is it's tick season. The deer tick, which carries Lyme disease, is out, so I tuck my pants in my socks and I'll do a tick check this evening. Before you start your hike, it's a good habit to use the boot brush station. What this does is any seeds that are on your shoes from the last time I walked, it was around my own yard or maybe another park. If there's any seeds on my shoes that have invasive species on them, I want to try to leave them here at the parking lot rather than track them into Pete's Woods. We don't want to get any garlic mustard there. Okay, let's start on our hike. What we're going to be looking at today are mostly spring ephemeral wildflowers. Spring ephemerals are those that complete their growth cycle before the trees leaf out fully. So they put up foliage, bloom, and create seed. The most true ephemerals actually die back to the ground. The foliage will die back to the ground later in the summer. There's some advantages to these wildflowers to start their growth cycle so early. One is they get the full sunlight before the trees provide shade. There's higher moisture. We're not too long after the snow melted and the trees aren't transpiring liquid yet. And soil nutrients are plentiful because there's the decaying leaf litter from last fall's leaves. The trees don't leaf out as early because the air temperature fluctuates a lot more high up in the trees. So if we get some cold nights, that could freeze those buds. But down low to the forest floor, the air temperature fluctuates less. And the earliest spring wildflowers are usually the shortest ones. So today we'll be looking at Hepatica, Bloodroot, Spring Beauty, Trout Lily, Squirrel Corn, Dutchman Breeches. Most of those are pretty short little plants. This plant here is called Plantain-leaved sedge. It's a sedge, and maybe you've heard the rhyme, sedges have edges. It has to do with the creases in the leaf. This particular one has really broad leaves, and if you took a cross section of the leaf, it's kind of like an M shape. These little stalks coming up have little yellow fuzzies on top, and that is the bloom of the plantain-leaved sedge. This flower here is called Bloodroot, the white petals and the yellow center. It has a single leaf and a single flower per plant. Bloodroot and Hepatica and Spring Beauty are the three earliest bloomers. Bloodroot we're lucky to see today because they don't last very long. As soon as this plant is pollinated, it'll start dropping its petals. They usually are only out for about 2 or 3 days bloom time. That's a good reason why it's always nice if you can hike the woods frequently in the spring. When they're first coming up, the leaves wrap around the bud, and that helps insulate it from cold weather in the spring. But these are pretty advanced. They're open. The foliage of this plant, if you broke the stem, it has a red sap. That's why it's called Bloodroot. And the foliage isn't truly ephemeral. It'll continue to grow until August, so these leaves will get bigger throughout the season, and then after that they'll turn yellow like with fall color. This is one of the early spring plants that open and close depending on rain and cloud cover, so light and rain. When it's cold, the leaf will wrap around, insulating the bud, and the flower will close to keep the rain out and not to waste pollen. This plant here is called Sharp-Lobed Hepatica. The sharp lobe is the three-lobed leaves which have sharp points. There's also a round-lobed hepatica, but we have mostly sharp-lobed here at Arcadia Dunes. The flowers of hepatica are pastel, and they can range from white to blue to pink. They have thread-like stamens, and one of the things that's distinctive is it has a furry fur coat on its stems, and that helps keep the plant insulated on the cold early spring nights. This and Bloodroot and Spring Beauty are one of the three very earliest wildflowers. Like Bloodroot, this one, the foliage doesn't die back when the trees leaf out completely. These more maroon colored leaves here are from last year's plant, and the bright green are this year. Usually we're pretty far along. The flowers will come out when you have just last year's maroon, and then the leaves, but we happened to catch this one when it still had 3 blossoms. Here's a plant I didn't expect to see starting to bloom today. It's a Bellwort. It's a yellow flower with dangling petals that have kind of a twist to them. And while it's in bloom, the foliage is kind of droopy. Looks like it's wilting, but that's just normal. After it's done blooming, it perks up. Surprised to see this is it usually is in peak bloom when the trillium are in bloom. I've seen a lot of trillium buds, but I haven't seen any trillium open. Anyways, these guys are starting a little bit early, but you'll see carpets of yellow when they get open when the trillium are in bloom. Here's a really nice patch of Trout Lily. Trout Lily has its name because of the mottled leaf, which is kind of like what a brook or a brown trout looks like. It's a plant that grows mostly vegetatively. It does produce seed, but mostly vegetatively. So these single leaves here, these are also Trout Lily. If a plant is going to bloom, it'll have 2 leaves. So if you looked in here carefully, each of these blooms has 2 leaves. So it mostly spreads underground runners. They'll send up single leaves. The single leaves are unfertile. The 2 leaves are fertile. And where it sends up a single leaf, it'll have a root structure which will start going deeper into the soil. After about 4 to 7 years, maybe longer depending on the site, you'll start getting a 2-leafed flower at this point here. The root systems, because it is colonial, it really helps to stabilize the soil. And the fun thing about probably my favorite thing about the Trout Lily is that the blooms close at night and open every day. They do that to protect the pollen and the nectar from rain, and also at night their pollinating insects aren't out, so they close at night. So this is a plant that hasn't opened yet, but they'll look like this at night, and then in the morning when it starts getting light, the flowers will start opening, and these petals, when it's really bright, they're recurved, they're bent backwards. The stamen, which are called anthers on Trout Lily, can be 2 colors, red or yellow. This one here is reddish. We're just going to do a quick stop to show you the first leaf of Appendaged Waterleaf. The plant has its name because the first leaves that come out of the ground in the season are mottled like a watermark. The next leaves that come up, here's a plant that's further along. First leaves were watermarked. The second leaves are just solid bright green. We'll have to come back in June to see this one in bloom. This little tiny flower that you see all over the place is Spring Beauty. It's one of the first to bloom with Hepatica, Bloodroot, and Spring Beauty. But Spring Beauty will start blooming early in the season. You can find it for about a month. It blooms for a long time. It's mixed in with foliage of Dutchman's Breeches and Squirrel Corn, so it's a little confusing. The leaf that we're looking at is this smoothed-edged oval leaf. And the flower is 5 petals, ranging in different hues of white to pink. And what's distinctive is the darker pink veins. And those are nectar guides that would guide the pollinator towards the center of the flower where it'll find the nectar. And I've read that those nectar guides are UV reflecting, so if you're a pollinator, you see the forest a lot differently than we do. And those nectar guides are kind of like the runway lights on an airport at night. If you want to see Spring Beauty in bloom, plan your hike for when the temperature gets above 50 degrees. Spring Beauty will close at dark on a cloudy day or at night. Also, if the temperature is below 52 degrees at the ground level. The reason for that is that the plant doesn't want to waste its nectar and pollen when the pollinating insects aren't out. They're not out on rainy days or at night. So plan your trips for when it's above 50 degrees so that it's 52 degrees on a sunny day down at ground level. This plant is called Dutchman's Breeches, and it got its name because the flower looks like pantaloons that are hung on a clothesline up to dry. They're white flowers, pointed V-shaped tips, and at the bottom of the flower this is the opening for the insect to find the nectar, and that's a little bit of yellow. These are upside down flowers, so they're protected from rain, so there's no moving parts that close at night on this one. They're pollinated by queen bumblebees, and the queen bumblebee has the strength to open up this little opening here, and has the size and has the tongue length where it can get the nectar, which is up in the top of the spikes. The pollen is down below, and by trying to get that nectar up at the top, it gets pollen on its face and its legs and moves on to the next plant and pollinates the plants. You might, if you're looking at it closely, I don't see any on this plant, if you see any holes up at the top of the flower, that means that some other insects chewed a hole through there to kind of like cheat and get the nectar without pollinating the plant. This plant here is called Squirrel Corn. It's a relative of Dutchman's Breeches. They have similar looking foliage, but the Squirrel Corn, instead of the spikes at the top of the flower being pointed like the pantaloons, they're rounded like a heart. The plants aren't fully in bloom yet. They're not fully in their heart shape, but another common name for squirrel corn is wild bleeding heart. The reason why it got its name is if you would dig down into the roots, you would find a root storage structure that looks like, it's yellow and it looks like shell corn. You can often find squirrel corn, right just here, and Dutchman's Breeches back here, growing close together, and when that happens, one of the folk nicknames is called boys and girls. The boys are the pants and the girls are the hearts. Thanks for coming along on my hike today. I like to come out on a wildflower hike about once a week because there's always new flowers blooming. If you want to come on a wildflower hike, you might want to download a guide, go to the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy website. That's gtrlc.org. Find a spring wildflower guide. Also, you can look on the website and find a list of other places that are good for viewing spring wildflowers.